A few years ago, I was coaching a woman who told me I texted him 4 times, called him twice, and all I got was a scene. No reply. Nothing. She looked at me, eyes full of confusion, and asked, "What am I doing wrong?" And I said, "You're doing too much of the talking and not enough of the listening to yourself." See, we're taught to believe that love is proven by how hard we fight, how much we explain, how long we hold on. But what no one teaches you is this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining and start disappearing. Silence isn't you giving up. Silence is you finally listening to your worth. And ironically, it's often the silence, not the words, that finally makes him hear you. I remember once working with a woman who felt utterly defeated. She told me, "If I don't say something, he'll never know how I feel." And I looked at her and said, "But hasn't he already shown you that he's not listening?" See, we think staying silent is a sign of weakness, that if we don't speak up, we're somehow losing the battle. But silence, when it's intentional, isn't weakness at all. It's the highest form of self-respect. It says, "I've said all that needs to be said. Now I'm going to watch what you choose to do with it." There was a time in my own life when I kept trying to fix a situation with someone through words, through logic, through clarity, through emotional transparency. I thought if I just explained better, if I just showed them how much I cared, things would shift, but nothing changed. And eventually, I realized I wasn't being respected, I was being tolerated. So I stopped. I didn't storm out. I didn't write a final message. I simply stopped giving access to someone who was squandering it. And that shift did more than protect me, reintroduced me to my power. Silence is the moment you stop trying to convince someone of your value. It's when you decide that your energy, your peace, your future is too important to keep investing in places where it's not being matched. And ironically, it's in that silence that others often begin to feel your true value because for the first time, they're no longer distracted by the sound of your effort. All they're left with is the emptiness of what they once had and never truly saw. Sometimes the loudest declaration of self-worth is the one you never say out loud. There's a psychological truth we often overlook in relationships. The more we over-explain, the more our words start to lose their weight. When you constantly communicate your needs, your hurt, your confusion, especially to someone who keeps dismissing them, you're not building connection, you're feeding emotional fatigue. And over time, your voice becomes background noise, not because your feelings aren't valid, but because your presence is assumed and your effort is expected. That dynamic is dangerous. I've seen this play out not just in intimate relationships, but in life business, family, friendships. I once had a client who kept repeating herself to her partner, pleading for understanding. She had grown convinced that if she could just find the right words, he'd finally see her. But what she didn't realize was that she was reinforcing a pattern. She talks, he nods, nothing changes. I told her, "You're making it easy for him to ignore you." And that's exactly what happens when you stay in constant pursuit of someone's attention. It devalues your presence. There's something profoundly powerful about distance, about restraint. When you stop filling every gap with words, you create space for thought, for consequence, for reflection. It's in that space that another person is forced to feel not just hard the reality of your absence. And that can be far more effective than another emotional plea. I've learned this personally. The most pivotal shifts in my life, whether in love or influence, didn't come from speaking louder, but from stepping back, creating enough distance for the other person to meet me halfway or not at all. And in that moment, I always found out who truly valued the connection, because sometimes the silence you keep is the only thing that finally gets heard. There's a fundamental principle in relationships and frankly, in life, that you only become truly valued when you stop trying so hard to be valued. I've seen this countless times, both in my own experience and with the people I've coached. When you chase, When you constantly seek validation, attention, or affection from someone who doesn't prioritize you, you diminish your own worth in their eyes. The pursuit signals neediness, a lack of confidence, and that's rarely attractive. I remember a moment in my own life when I realized this. I was desperately trying to win over a connection by being endlessly available, texts, calls, invitations. But the more I gave, the more distant the response became. It wasn't until I stopped chasing, until I withdrew my energy and presence, that the dynamic shifted. Suddenly, he started noticing not just the surface level, but the depth of what he was losing. When you stop chasing, you stop giving the other person control over your emotional state. You reclaim your power, your peace. This shift unsettles the dynamic because now they have to ask themselves, what happens if she doesn't come back? What if this is the last time? That question creates space for reflection, regret, and sometimes a deeper appreciation. The truth is, people often take presence for granted until it's no longer guaranteed. Your relentless chasing has been a safety net for them. And when you step off, that safety net disappears. It forces them to see you as more than an option. It forces them to see you as someone who has choices. And once you make that choice to stop chasing, you invite a new kind of respect tone that starts with yourself. Because you can't be truly missed until you're no longer chasing. There's a profound truth about presence and absence that many people overlook in relationships. Often we think that speaking up, making noise, explaining ourselves will solidify our importance. But sometimes the louder you speak, the easier it becomes to tune you out. I remember a time when I was involved in a relationship where I felt unheard despite all the effort I put into communicating. I tried to be vocal, to make sure my feelings were clear, but it only seemed to deepen the disconnect. It wasn't until I stepped back and let my presence recede that things began to shift. Your absence carries a weight that your words often cannot match. When you're constantly available, constantly expressive, it becomes easy for someone to take you for granted. Your voice blends into the background noise of their life. But when you pull away, when the space you once filled is suddenly empty, that silence screams louder than any conversation ever could. It forces reflection. It unsettles complacency. It creates a vacuum where regret starts to grow. I've seen this principle work not only in personal relationships, but also in professional settings. When a key player stops showing up, their absence is immediately felt. The project stalls, the energy shifts, and suddenly everyone realizes the true value that person brought to the table. The same happens in love. Your absence becomes the mirror that shows the full picture, what was there, what was lost, and what can't be replaced. It's uncomfortable for the other person because absence exposes the truth behind the words they never fully heard or appreciated. And that's when real change can begin, because sometimes what's missing speaks louder than what's said. The most powerful message you can send isn't spoken, it's experienced in the silence you leave behind. One of the most profound gifts and challenges you can offer someone who's taken you for granted is the space to face themselves. When you choose silence, when you withdraw your presence, you're not just stepping away physically, you're inviting them to sit with the version of themselves that allowed this connection to slip away. I've witnessed this dynamic countless times, both in my life and through the stories shared by people I've worked with. Often, the hardest thing for someone is to confront the reality that their actions or inactions had real consequences. I remember an experience where I was involved in a situation where I hadn't fully acknowledged my part in the breakdown of a relationship. It wasn't until the silence filled the space that I was forced to look inward. Without the constant noise of attempts to fix, explain, or justify, I was left face to face with my mistakes and the person I risked losing. It was uncomfortable, unsettling, and deeply necessary. Letting someone sit with that version of themselves is powerful because growth rarely comes from words alone. It comes from discomfort, from reflection, from confronting the truth without distraction. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop filling the gaps, you remove the buffer that often shields them from self-awareness. The silence becomes a mirror that reflects the parts they might have ignored, the neglect, the distance, the missed opportunities. This isn't about punishment or bitterness. It's about creating space for honest reflection, for accountability, and for transformation. When he finally sits with that version of himself, the one who lost you, he's faced with a choice to grow and change or to live with the loss. And that moment of reflection, however, painful is where true understanding begins. There's a common misconception that silence in a relationship is a form of revenge, that when someone pulls back, it's about making the other person suffer to punish them for their mistakes. But that's not what silence is at its core. Silence is about clarity. It's about evolution. It's the conscious choice to step away from the noise, the drama, and the endless cycle of explanations, to create space for your own growth. I've been in situations where I thought silence was about withholding, about making a point. But over time, I realized it was much deeper. It was about protecting my energy and allowing myself the room to evolve beyond the pain. Revenge is reactive. It's tied to ego and resentment. It keeps you locked in a loop tied to someone else's behavior and your emotional response to it. But silence, true silence, comes from a place of self-respect and empowerment. It's a pause to realign with your values and priorities, to rebuild yourself without distraction or chaos. When I've seen people genuinely grow through silence, it's because they chose to stop reacting and start reflecting. This space allows you to detach from the need for validation, to stop chasing closure from someone who may never provide it, and instead seek closure within yourself. It's a shift from being controlled by the relationship to taking ownership of your healing. I've witnessed clients transform when they stop trying to control outcomes and instead focus on their own clarity and evolution. That's when strength truly emerges. Silence isn't about making someone pay. It's about making yourself whole. And that difference changes everything. There's a powerful difference between detaching with grace and detaching with bitterness. And understanding this distinction can transform how you move forward after a relationship or emotional setback. I've seen so many people fall into the trap of bitterness, holding on to anger, resentment, and pain, thinking it will somehow protect them or punish the other person. But bitterness is like carrying a heavy weight that only drags you down. It keeps you tethered to the past and to the person who hurt you, preventing real healing. I've experienced moments where I felt justified in my bitterness. I wanted to hold on to the pain because it felt like proof that I mattered, that the other person had wronged me deeply. But what I learned, often the hard way, is that bitterness clouds your judgment and blocks your growth. It becomes a barrier to peace, not a bridge. Grace, on the other hand, is a conscious choice. It's choosing to detach not out of spite or anger, but out of respect for yourself and the life you want to build. Detaching with grace means acknowledging your pain, learning from it, and then releasing it so you can move forward lighter and stronger. It's the difference between walking away with a heart full of clarity versus one full of confusion and bitterness. In my own journey, the moments I've grown the most weren't when I was angry or vengeful, but when I chose to let go calmly and with dignity. It allowed me to create space for new opportunities, healthier relationships, and deeper self-awareness. Detachment isn't about closing doors angrily, it's about opening new ones with intention. Detach with grace, because bitterness only keeps you stuck in what you're trying to leave behind. One of the hardest lessons in relationships is realizing that the space you once filled was taken for granted, and sometimes the only way for someone to truly understand your value is to let them feel the gap you leave behind. This isn't about playing games or seeking revenge. It's about creating a natural consequence for neglect. I've seen this dynamic play out in my own life and in countless others. When you're always available, always forgiving, always the one who shows up, it's easy for the other person to forget just how much effort and love you invested. That effort becomes the background noise of their life. I remember a time when I was caught in a pattern of overgiving in a relationship. I thought my constant presence and support would eventually be recognized, but it wasn't. What changed everything wasn't a long explanation or a dramatic confrontation. It was stepping back, letting my absence speak for itself. Suddenly, the comfort and consistency I provided became glaringly obvious, not because I shouted it, but because it was missing. That gap you leave is more than just physical absence. It's emotional space, energy, and presence that can't be easily replaced. When he begins to fill that void, that's when reality sets in the realization that what he had was rare, valuable, and not guaranteed. This isn't about punishing him, but about honoring your worth. It's about allowing him to confront what it feels like to no longer have you as a constant in his life. Letting him feel that gap is a powerful act of self-respect, because sometimes absence is the only language people truly understand. What he misses in your silence speaks louder than anything you could ever say. There's a profound transformation that happens when you embrace silence, just as a pause, but as a powerful tool for growth and clarity. Silence does two things at once. It builds you up while breaking down the illusions that have been holding you back. In my own life, I've experienced moments where the noise of constant talking, explaining, and justifying felt exhausting and empty. It wasn't until I embraced silence, stepping back from trying to control the narrative, that I began to rebuild my sense of self and see things clearly. Silence allows you to detach from the stories you tell yourself and others. It exposes the illusions, the false hopes, the denial, the distorted perceptions that often cloud your judgment. When you stop filling every gap with words, you create a space where truth can emerge. You begin to see the situation for what it really is, not what you wished it to be. That clarity is painful but necessary, because illusions keep you trapped in cycles of disappointment and confusion. At the same time, silence gives you the opportunity to rebuild from the inside out. It's in the quiet moments that you reconnect with your values, your strength, and your purpose. I've seen this happen with clients who, when they stopped reacting emotionally and started sitting with their silence, found a new sense of peace and empowerment. They stopped chasing validation and started focusing on their own growth. The silence isn't emptiness. It's fertile ground for transformation. It breaks the false narratives and plants the seeds of a stronger, clearer, more resilient you. And that is the kind of strength that can never be taken away. True power in any relationship or in life itself is revealed not when you demand to be missed, but when you reach a point where being missed no longer defines your worth. This is a subtle but profound shifter movement from dependence on external validation toward internal sovereignty. I've seen this in my own journey and in the journeys of those I've mentored. The moment someone stops chasing the need to be seen, heard, or missed is when they step into a whole new level of freedom. For years, I used to measure my value by how much someone noticed my absence, how much they expressed longing or regret. But I realized this dynamic kept me trapped in a cycle of needing their approval to feel whole. It was exhausting and ultimately disempowering. The real breakthrough came when I stopped focusing on whether or not I was missed and instead focused on being whole and complete within myself. When you no longer need to be missed, you are free from the emotional roller coaster that comes with uncertainty and chasing. You are not defined by someone else's feelings or reactions. Instead, your power comes from your ability to stand firmly in your own value, regardless of how others respond. This kind of power attracts respect because it signals confidence, self-worth, and emotional independence. In practice, this means investing in yourself, your passions, your growth, your peace, without waiting for external validation. It's the difference between living in reaction to others and living in alignment with your own truth. And paradoxically, this is often when others begin to truly notice it, not because you needed them to, but because your energy has shifted. Real power isn't about making someone miss you, it's about not needing to be missed at all. True strength isn't in noise or desperation, it's in the quiet confidence of knowing your worth. Silence isn't weakness or punishment, it's an act of self-respect and clarity. When you choose silence, you create space for growth, reflection, and transformation. It's about reclaiming your energy and dignity, detaching with grace, and letting absence speak louder than words. This silence becomes your sanctuary, where healing happens and your strongest self emerges. Embrace the quiet moments as opportunities to build and evolve. The deepest love and respect you'll ever receive begin with the love and respect you give yourself.